Andreas Vesalius was a physician who was born in Brussels in 1514. So this year is the 500th anniversary of his birth. And we celebrate it because his one great work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which was known as simply Fabrica, was printed in 1543 and was extremely influential at the time and was an extremely beautiful book, which laid the foundation for all future books of illustrated books of anatomy. There was not much before him in the way of illustrated anatomy, so his work was very much a landmark in the history of anatomy. 3 years ago, we were approached about a second edition of the Fabrica. There were only 2 editions, and this particular copy we were offered was annotated by Vesalius. Of course, at first we didn't believe that it was in his hand because nobody knew about this copy. Anyway, it was put on deposit at the Fisher, and I think it was at that time that we realized that it was only 2 years away from the 500th anniversary of his birth, and therefore it would be a good time, an appropriate time to put on an exhibition. There's many ways you can approach Vesalius, but the way I did it was looked at the books, some of the books he would have read as a student, and at the same time some of the anatomical books that were around before his time and also during his time, during his school year, his university years. You cannot study Vesalius without saying something about Galen, who dominated medicine for almost 1500 years. But what he'd written on anatomy he wrote quite a bit on anatomy, but most of it was lost. And it was during the 1520s, so that is just before Vesalius went to university, that there was almost a campaign to recover the lost texts of Galen and to correct those texts that did exist. Galen's major work on anatomy was a work called De Anatomicis Administrationibus, of which the first 9 books were discovered, or we recovered in the 1520s. The last 3 books were only recovered in the 20th century. So we have the first Latin translation, which was done by one of his teachers, Günther, in the exhibition. And we have the second Greek edition. You have to remember Galen was Greek, wrote in Greek. And we have the second Greek version of the first 9 books. Then I looked at books which he may have, or we know that he read, books which in some ways, I mean, he gets a lot of credit for making certain discoveries and setting out anatomy on a completely new plan, but there were other people before him who suggested this. He sort of brought it all together. So there are works, illustrated works of anatomy just before in 1520s, 1510s. So they're in the exhibition. And then looked at various books which Vesalius wrote and various editions of his works. De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which was known as simply Fabrica, it was important for several reasons. The most important aspect of it is that it used very high quality illustrations and brought together text and illustrations. He understood the importance of the relationship between it, and he was very careful about the way the book was laid out. In other words, the illustrations are with the key is very close to the text. He insisted on this, and that kind of lay a foundation for future books on anatomy. He's also responsible for bringing art. I mean, these things are really true art into medicine. Not so much for their accuracy, but for their beauty. So he understood what a beautiful book looked like. He got one of the finest printers to print the book. And the result was this remarkable volume. And at the end, we've included the new English translation, which was only completed last year. 100 and, how many hundred years? 400 and odd years after the first publication. So that was a big event in itself, the publication of that work by Carga Publishers of Basel, which is appropriate because that's where Vesalius publishes Fabrica. So that came out last year, and that occupies one of the cases, sort of full circle.